Once a season, I get to do interviews that I originally conceived as girl talk sessions with women in the lifestyle. But I recently had a friend say that she hates when people use girl to talk about women. So I'm modifying the title of these interviews to Badass Women of the Lifestyle Sessions. In the past, I've talked to April from Naughty Gym and Rachel Krantz, the author of Open. And today I have the great privilege of sitting down with my friend, Catherine, the coach from Expansive Connection Coaching. She has a practice of 5 coaches that are committed to helping ethically non-monogamous relationships thrive. Her undergraduate degree is in health promotion, and she has a master's degree in community counseling. She has over 18 years experience as a nationally certified and licensed counselor. She's also a relationship coach and a registered yoga teacher. And she's here to talk to us about using her adult chair approach to coaching, specifically in non-monogamy. Welcome, Catherine.
Thank you so much for having me. I will sit down and talk with you, whatever we want to call ourselves, anytime.
All right. Well, you're certainly a badass woman of the lifestyle, and we can have girl talk.
Sounds great.
So I first heard about you back in 2017 on the We Got a Thing podcast, and you did a fantastic talk on jealousy, which I listened to 3 times before I even thought I had a problem with jealousy.
Oh, wow. Thank you.
It was so good. So if anyone has experienced any kind of, jealousy, insecurity, fear, rearing its ugly head in your non-monogamous relationship, definitely go back and listen to Catherine talking with Mr. and Mrs. Jones about that topic. She does such a great job. And then we got to
Thank
meet
you
in
so
person
much.
at PCAP, and we hung out in Miami and Dallas. And it just seemed like a no-brainer for us when we did hit a wall, Liam and I, in our relationship, to call you up and say, Catherine, help us. So
Oh, yes.
I've so our relationship has gone on a little continuum, but I realized as we were sitting down that I don't actually know too much about you and your story. So give us a little snapshot of who Catherine is, maybe going back to young Catherine, your family of origin. Tell us a little bit about you so that we can get to know you before we get into the nitty gritty of your adult chair stuff.
Well, thank you for having me and thank you for asking. And it's interesting, I've been on many podcasts in the ethically non-monogamous space, and I've told my story about ethical non-monogamy many times. No one's ever asked me about who I am outside of that or before. So thank you. And I think we'll keep most of my sharing on that because people can go back and listen to, especially if they're going to hear the jealousy episode, which just for ease is number 41 on We Got a Thing. You can hear more about my journey there. But so yeah, thank you for starting with that. And especially with the topic that we've chosen to discuss today about our inner parts and our inner children and inner teenagers that live in us. It is helpful when I work with clients. I really ask them to go back and reintroduce themselves to those parts of themselves. So what a great way to ask me to introduce myself. So I'm an only child. My parents were a little older when they had me back in the 70s. It seemed like they were older. It certainly wouldn't be now. My dad was an active alcoholic and cocaine addict for the first 4 years of my life. And my mom was a classic people pleaser, enabler, codependent that, was trying to do all the things with hopes that he would be better for her and for us. And eventually he realized that he was going to lose us. And that was the motivator that got his butt into rehab. And he found a phenomenal therapist that I grew up hearing about my whole life, which I definitely think planted some seeds for my career choice, about how influential Joyce was to my dad, and really helped him see how getting clean was for him. And so I grew up in a household talking about recovery, about 12 steps. I also had alcoholism on my mother's side that was not addressed. And so I was seeing both sides of that. And I don't know, it's just always I was an only child. my parents were older. They didn't have friends that had children. So I was around adults a lot, and I felt very comfortable around adults. I felt really awkward around my peers, honestly, until I was about 25. I didn't really get it. I have a memory of being taken to a preschool. It must have been, I must have been 4 or 5. I remember walking in and just kind of standing back and watching the scene. And I remember seeing like kids running around and like banging into each other and making noises. And I was like, really? And I went up and I talked to one of the teachers. And my mom told me later that the teacher was like, yeah, so your daughter keeps asking if she can eat lunch with us. Because I felt comfortable. I knew how to be a little adult. I was raised to be a little adult. I didn't know how to play. I didn't know how to be silly. I could hang with the adults. Some people called that old soul. I don't know. But I was always a person that friends and even adults, to be honest with you, disclosed a lot of information. I was very much parentalized, which is a word we use in counselorese land in the therapy land, where my parents were very much still growing up themselves and leaned on me a lot. Talked to me about, honestly, now I can see way too much and things that were inappropriate, but it made me feel special. It made me feel needed. It made me feel like I had a role. It's how I assessed closeness, was that how much they talked to me about grown-up things, which, still showing up in my relationships. I want a lot of verbal processing with my partners. And then I got into athletics. I was a dancer, a ballet dancer, a modern dancer for most of my life, most of my childhood. And then I got into sports in high school and running, and went to a summer camp right after high school to teach, to be a lifeguard. And the aerobics instructor got sick and had to leave. And I worked out every day. So they're like, well, you work out, you can go teach aerobics. Like, I don't know how to do that, but I was a dancer and I was athletic. So I did it and I loved it. And I ended up teaching the kids about exercise and lifting and stress reduction. I taught a class about stress reduction to kids at a summer camp when I was 18 years old. And I loved that. So I ended up changing my major from international business to health promotion, exercise science. And I loved that. I did my internship at the White House Athletic Center, which is a fun fact. And we didn't work with the president or anything, but we worked with his staff and got to work with the head of the Navy mess. So I knew what the president and all of his people like to eat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Those were always fun conversations. Which is a wonderful job. But what I would find is I was a terrible personal trainer because I'm supposed to be there counting the reps of biceps, but we would get into such deep conversations that I'd forget to count. And at one point somebody's like, this is more like therapy than personal training. And I was like, huh. So that's what led me to go back and get my master's in counseling. That led me on that. And so through that in my career, I've worked with all sorts of different populations. I've always been a seeker and a grower, a growth mindset person. I still sometimes struggle. Not now, I've found my tribe, but there have been times as a woman where I've found it's been a hard time. I've had a hard time finding my tribe of women because I can't stand to take time and be in close, intimate proximity with people that want to talk about like the oak back end smell of a wine. Like, I'm like, really? I thought wine club was just an excuse to talk about real stuff. Why are we talking about wine? Or I go to a book club and be like, oh, you guys actually read the book? I thought we were here to just talk. And so, of course, it was natural that I would love this profession because people pay me to sit down and talk about really deep, intimate things. And the last thing they want to do is pay me by the minute to do small talk. So I've definitely found my calling. And then, of course, we stumbled out, I won't get into the details, but we stumbled into ethical non-monogamy, and that created this whole other career path for me to help people with that. I will say one other thing. When I was in grad school, I used to get in trouble for self-disclosure. You're not supposed to do that. And that was always the feedback that I would get when I would get in, quote, trouble in my supervision. And then ironically, when I started working clinically, the people that really clicked with me and really loved my work, that's always what they said. I love that you're so real. I love that you'll talk about what's going on in your life because I don't feel so alone. And I wanted to go back and show that to my professors. But I understand why they did it, and you certainly have to be careful and make sure that the self-disclosure is about the therapeutic process, not to show up and be, get therapy yourself. But that really led to why I started Expansive Connection and the coaches that I brought on, because we are all on an ethically non-monogamous journey and we're willing to be open and talk about it. So it's like we're walking on a path, you're walking on a path, we'll walk with you. And that's what led to that business and the people wonderful coaches that I've gathered to help me in that work.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I got my coaching certification, and during the instructional and practice times, I was really struggling with not being able to share, because their approach is just ask questions. Don't provide any information. Don't give them any tips or advice. Just ask questions. And I'm like holding my lips shut, trying not to say, things about my own experience. So I don't know if I'd be a great coach.
Well, again, I think
certified.
that they have to. Yeah, okay. I think they have to teach I don't want to say the lowest common denominator, because that sounds disparaging, but more like they need to do it for the people that have trouble discerning when and how, or if you're working with really high needs populations that knowing too much about their therapist or their counselor could be confusing for their therapeutic process. Again, generally with people in the lifestyle or ethically non-monogamous, we're working with pretty high functioning people that are doing great in life and want to be even better. So we have a lot of good ego strength, and we have a lot of people that, can understand different roles and boundaries and things like that. So I think it's a little safer space.
Right. Okay, so let's get into talking about your adult chair approach to coaching. So I recently read Dick Schwartz's book, No Bad Parts, about the internal family systems approach. And having worked with you and your adult chair, I was thinking, okay, so there are a lot of similarities, but a few differences. So can you tell us what's the difference, and maybe what are the similarities between IFS and what you do?
Yes. Okay. So first of all, I always get accused of counselorese, so we're gonna always try to remind people of our acronyms. IFS is Internal Family Systems, and I also want to say that the adult chair is not my model. It's one that I love and I recommend all the time, and I made sure that one of my coaches is certified in, because we use it all the time. So the adult chair was actually developed by Michelle Chalfant, and she has a wonderful podcast. I recommend it highly. And she took the model that she created. She was trained in IFS. She was trained in Gestalt therapy, which I'm trained in as well, which is a much older therapy from Fritz Perls back in the 60s, where he would use literal chairs in the room, and you would get up and so let's say you were having a dialogue with a part of yourself, you would sit in one chair as, say, the child, and one chair as the adult, and you would literally have to move in the therapist's office to help you kinesthetically see the difference. They also would have an empty chair sessions where you would put your father in that chair, and you'd quote speak to your father, but you needed to be looking at something that way. And so she took Gestalt, she took interfamily systems, and then she also teaches yoga and has meditation and mindfulness practices. And so she wove all of this into a model called the adult chair. And so, but the basis of all of this is that IFS, Gestalt, the adult chair, is that we have these different parts of us that still live within us. And sometimes that sounds like we're talking about multiple personality disorder or dissociative identity disorder. It's not that, because in dissociative identity or multiple personality disorder, which is very, 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 very rare, when someone is in that other personality, they are completely disassociated or unaware of reality and who they are. Catherine, in December of 2023, that's gone. They are this other personality. When we're talking about IFS or Gestalt or the adult chair, we are still aware of who we are when we are. It's more like we're working to have an adult in the room. I like to call it the benevolent leader. So when I work with people, I give them the example of maybe it's a king or queen with the round table of advisors, or in the States, we would have the president with the different secretaries, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of Agriculture. How would that work in Canada? Are we talking prime minister and cabinet?
Prime minister and yeah, exactly.
Okay, all right. Oh,
well done.
Yeah, You know us in the States. We're a little ethnocentric about our government. We just seem to know ours and no one else's, even Canada, right next door. Another way to think of it is...
We pay more attention to your politics than our own, honestly.
That's because you probably like to watch soap operas.
It's more entertaining, yeah.
Absolutely. Another example would be the president of a company, a CEO of a company, and the different department heads. So we want to have a benevolent leader sitting at the head of the table, and then IFS, the adult chair. The basic idea and the similarity between the two is that they want you to get to know and personify the different parts of you, and realize that these different parts around the table often don't agree. They often have their own agenda, much like you can imagine the fights that the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of Agriculture might have. And you want to have them to be very passionate about defense and very passionate about agriculture. And they don't have to necessarily get along, but they need to have the trust of the benevolent leader to hear them, hear all of them, and make a decision that fits, that is the best for the country, if you will. So right. Honestly, I think I use the adult chair more than IFS because I think it's a more simplified version, and I think people can grasp on. There aren't as many different terms and characters, if you will. And it seems to me that, especially at first brush, people can get on board with the adult chair, and if they really like it, then I send them to IFS. So I would say adult chair is like the elementary school version, and IFS is going to be more like the high school deeper dive into really quantifying the parts, putting them into different categories and that sort of thing. I will also mention that while the adult chair model I think is wonderful, it has the child, the adolescent, and the adult. I found in my work with clients that it was missing a part. And so when I teach, I have a webinar called Musical Chairs, which we'll share in the show notes, where I added a part, and that's called the adaptive child. And so we'll get into those a little bit more. But so I pull from Gestalt, I pull from IFS, I pull from the adult chair, and then of course, as we all do, we have to make it a little our own. So I added an extra character to the play there.
Right. So I guess the commonality is it acknowledges that there's kind of a central self. You know, Schwartz would call it the self. Mm-hmm. You would call it the person in the adult chair. And then that is you at your core, your truest being. And then there are all these different voices that have maybe different opinions that come from different stages of your development. And they are kind of whirling around, sometimes warring in your mind. Is that kind of the core of all of these therapies?
Yes, although I will say, at first, when you say like your purest self, when you're first doing this, when you have your butt in the adult chair, it may not feel very comfortable or familiar because you honestly may not have spent much time there. So in my model, I say pure child chair. And so when I hear pure, I tend to think of that as like the most unadulterated, can't think I can get that word out today. The least affected. Thank you. Part of you, the part that has very pure joy, pure sadness, pure fear. It isn't as influenced by nature, if you will. It's more like your nature, not your nurture. It's your more at your core. But our goal is to spend, as we learn this, to spend more and more time as our adult. So I would say your adult is maybe not your pure is a funny word. It's more like your wisest self, the part of you that is going to lead you to the healthiest and most productive decisions.
Okay. So you've mentioned the adaptive child, the snarky teenager. Can you go into just a little more depth on each of these characters so we can maybe recognize them more clearly in ourselves?
Yes. So we'll start with the pure child. As I said, that's our kind of if you think about yourself maybe at 4. Let me also mention this. You can absolutely use this model whether you're a parent or not. But I will say that when I work with people who are parents, sometimes they're able to grasp this better when we talk about when they think about what their children were like then, because sometimes it can be harder for us to remember what we were like ourselves. I also encourage people to get pictures of themselves at these different life stages so that they can cultivate even more compassion for them. When I'm working with parents, I'll, have them picture their child at 4 and imagine talking to their 4-year-old child with as much harshness as we often our inner critics are saying to us, right? So think about yourself or your child at 4. And this is just wild-eyed, pure excitement and joy for the world, believing everything is possible, an absolute hope junkie. This is something you'll hear later when we're talking about as adults, how we can fuel things and get just so hopeful about them, and then we create expectations and hurt ourselves. But there's just this blissful blossoming excitement and curiosity. It's the pureness of sadness. It's the pureness of fear. It's clean anger. Like, that's my toy. We don't have to get into whether it should be or you should share with your brother. Blah, 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 blah. It's my toy and I want it. Just clean anger. And that part is precious. And that part is very vulnerable and very sensitive, very easy to hurt. And as much as we would love to be able to just keep that joy and that innocence, there's the world. And our parents with their own unmet needs and mental health issues and distractions and substance use and blah, 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 blah. And all the things that can hurt this very sweet, vulnerable, sensitive heart. So as we are moving through the world, then there are these protector parts that come out to protect this pure, sweet child. And the protector parts in my model, I mostly keep them at 2. Again, once people get this model, we bring in more nuance. We look at IFS and we bring in, the firefighters and the managers and the different names. Or I actually have a critical professor that sits as one of my protectors. So generally we start with these 2 and then you can add them and sort of personalize them to yourself. But generally we have our adaptive child. And I like to think of this as like a child in those, what we call the golden years of childhood that, maybe like 7 to 11, the part of our childhood where we're rule followers. We believe that if we just do the right thing, everything will work out well, very cause and effect, very concrete. It's either right or wrong. When our kids are that age and they see us, saying no smoking, no smoking, no smoking. And then they see, that we're okay with our parents that still smoke. I remember my daughter saying, but smoking's bad, so we need to hate Granddaddy Mark, right? And I'm like, no. But, in those years, it doesn't make sense. If smoking's bad, then we should hate people that smoke. And so that part that's very rule following, very concrete, it's also the part that learns the dog and pony show that the adults like, how to perform, how to hustle for attention and affection, how to fold ourselves into a pretzel and then we get attention for it and we remember how to fold that, right? So this is a part that really wants to get along. It wants approval. It wants life to be joyful and easy to understand. Then we have the other protector of our pure child, which is the snarky adolescent or teenager. And this is the part that's like, gonna do anything and everything it can to keep this kid safe. And if somebody is being nasty or mean, we'll be more mean and more nasty. If somebody says that they don't love the child, well, fuck you, I'm gonna leave first. This is that part of us that tends to be self-sabotaging. Like, oh, I'm scared they might leave. I'm scared they might hurt me, pure child. They might hurt my pure child. So I'll leave first because at least I have some control. It's usually the part of us that it's like we cut off our nose to spite our face. That's usually a snarky teen thing to do. Snarky teen adolescent loves to use blaming anyone other than themselves because that's safer. And again, it's all done to protect this pure child. the snarky adolescent is where we get into complicated anger. Remember I talked about clean anger in the pure child? The adolescent is more of a complicated anger, meaning we might act angry when we're sad. We might act angry when we're scared. So it's not just clean, pure anger. It's more like a constellation emotion where it's hiding something else, but it gets attention. And another thing that can happen is if in our attempt to have attention and affection and connection with the people around us, if the adaptive child's tactics of folding themselves into a pretzel and being pleasing and fawning and lovey, and if that doesn't get us the attention that we're looking for, then the snarky adolescent's going to push her aside and be like, let's try this. And they're going to get big and loud and get the attention, because negative attention is better than no attention. So that's the difference in the flavors of those. And then, of course, our wise adult can see that all this is happening. It's kind of like top row of the bleachers, as I talk about in my Power of Witness coaching model. Of the wise adult can sit at the top row of the bleachers and see us, the games that our characters are playing, and help moderate what's happening. Now, one thing that I often have clients say after I explain this is, okay, cool. So how do we get rid of the snarky adolescent? Clearly, that's the problem. We just extricate that from our brains. And I'm like, no, and nor would you want to, because nobody loves that pure child like the adaptive child and the snarky teen. That is like your internal mama bear. Now, you don't want your mama bear to go fight all your battles, or everything would have lots of claw marks on it, right? But that level of love, that's actually where our self-love is. We love ourselves enough to protect ourselves. So we don't want that part to go away. We want that part to trust the benevolent adult, tell them when something feels off. We want to create enough trust and rapport with these parts of us that they will let us speak for them instead of grabbing the mic from us. We want to speak for our parts, not from them. And that's how we're able to have adult level communication and make wise decisions, because we've heard what everybody around the table has to say, but the adult is the one that is trusted to make the decision.
Right. Which is hard because, when you're cool and, removed from the situation, you can sit in that adult chair and be like, oh yeah, I saw my snarky adolescent come out there. But in the heat of the moment, to try and rein that in, it feels almost impossible. It's like you just revert to your inner, like, core being, right? Like it just pops out. So yeah, that's tricky. That's, I guess, the work, isn't it? Sorry, we froze up there. You still there?
So I heard you say we revert to our inner core being, if you can start there.
All right. Yeah, just we go back to what's easiest, right? To what you, in your unconscious mind, you don't have to think about it. It just comes out, I'm scared, and so I'm going to be angry because that's safer. And to try and keep your cool head in the moment when you're in the midst of conflict or in the midst of fear, and sit in that adult chair even when the parts are screaming to come out. That's the work we all have to do, isn't it?
Whew, it's so hard. And even when we're talking about it in the brain, keep in mind that if we think about how the brain develops, the pure child is more like our primal lizard brain, the part that's just about survival. And then the protector parts, the adaptive child and the snarky teen, the protector parts are a little more like the middle of the brain with like emotional memory and the amygdala. But keep in mind, amygdala is all about fight or flight. So again, remember concrete, black or white, fight or flight, binary, you either love me or you don't. This is right or wrong. And so once we're activated, once we're triggered, yes, it's very hard to stay up in the front smart part of our brain that understands paradox and can see things from different sides and the gray and all that, because the lower parts of our brain have been activated to say there's a threat, so we need to fight or flight. We need to freeze or fawn. We need to act like a snarky teenager to get our needs met, or fold ourselves in a pretzel like an adaptive child to get our needs met. And so when you say it's hard to do that, part of it is it's hard because there's not much blood left up here where we're able to do that. You know, have you ever seen when you're like, oh, exactly. When you're like, oh, silly me. There is actually like touching this part of the brain. Part of that is so that we get blood up there. Like, oh, I forgot. What was I thinking? Right? Oh, because we're trying to get this part online. When I work with clients, one of the things that we do when we say it's so hard to be there is sometimes I'll give them very cognitive exercises. And when they first start doing them, these very intelligent people feel like these exercises are impossible because there's no blood up here where you need it. But as I'm asking them to do those exercises, it's pulling blood there, which helps to, as we say, kind of get your lid on. If you look at, you know, if you've got your fist, your wrist is your brainstem, your primal brain, the pure child. The middle here where your thumb is, that's going to be your middle brain, your amygdala, the fight or flight. And then as our brain develops, we develop this beautiful prefrontal cortex that brings the fingers over the thumb to make a fist. And that's the adult. And then once we flip our lid, now the bottom of the brain is what's driving the train. And it is very hard to stay in our adult. So honestly, when I work with clients, it's more about helping them notice which chair they're in. So then they know what activities are appropriate. If you're in your pure child, if your protector parts are activated, honestly, it's not the time to be duking it out with your spouse. That's when you got to go to your corners and you both do some cognitive exercises, you do some physical exercises to roll through those stress hormones so that you can, whatever it is, to get your lid back on. So really the idea of like in the midst of argument, if you get activated and triggered, it isn't like this willpower of, I can stay in my adult chair. No, you're already out of it. So go away and don't do any more damage to the relationship until you can come back as adults.
Right. Yeah, I was going to ask, what tips or skills or tricks would you give people for, you know, when you're in that moment, when you know you're flipped and you're in your snarky adolescent or whatever, is there anything you can do in that moment, or is the best thing just to walk away, cool down, and come back together when you're individually, you know, back in control? Is that basically it?
For the most part, yes. I mean, well, first of all, let me say we're skipping over the hardest thing, which is learning the self-awareness to realize that we've flipped, to realize which chair we're in. Most of us, and again, that's why Michelle Chalfant so brilliantly brings in mindfulness and meditation into her model, because we have to cultivate our observer self that knows, whoa, something's weird. I don't usually think about my partner as my enemy. Something must be going on. Oh, I'm in a different chair. Or, wow, I'm noticing that my jaw is clenched like crazy. This could be a sign that I'm activated. So we just say it like, oh, we would just know that we're triggered. Whoa. Just realizing that we're activated and triggered is a huge part of the work. So let's not go over that too fast. Once you do have that awareness and you realize it, for the most part, oh, let me also say this fun little piece. When we find our intimate partners, there's a Harville Hendrix, Helen and Harville Hendrix is a married couple that they've given so much to the world of couples therapy. They have an imago model that talks about how our unconscious brains, our inner child, if you will, unconsciously pairs with a partner that helps to kind of recreate some of the situation of our childhood, so that we can then have try to have a corrective experience and get our needs met. It's a little complicated for the scope of our conversation here, but keep in mind that your partner is perfectly designed to trigger the shit out of your adolescent and adaptive child. And yours is perfectly designed to trigger the shit out of theirs. And so really, if you think about it, once you're both triggered, you are either 7-year-olds or 16-year-olds with boxing gloves. And there is nobody that you want to punch out more than your partner. And that doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. Honestly, that means that there's the right kind of passion, because passion is either fucking or fighting. And so we do have to be careful. We do have to be careful and realize that it's pretty rare that, especially if you're both flipped, that you can stay in physical proximity and pull it out. Sometimes you can do it if one of you hasn't completely flipped yet. And if that's the case, or if you're like, I call it like half cocked, where the front of your brain is just a little bit, the lid's like half cocked off. Sometimes you can do some couples regulation activities. This is something that my coaches and I teach, especially when we go to PCAP and when we go to Jamaica for being better at being bad with Naughty Gym. These are, when we're in person, these are skills we often teach about how to co-regulate. But you got to be careful, because sometimes just being in the room with that person is going to keep you from getting right. Is going to keep you dysregulated.
Right. Yeah, or when you feel like, all right, my lid's back on, I'm ready to talk about this. As soon as they say, one thing wrong, that's it. You're right back there. Yeah, so it's
Absolutely.
tricky.
It is for sure.
So as I was listening to you talk about the parts, I completely resonated with the adaptive child, and to the point where I felt like, well, that is me entirely. So is it possible for people to get so stuck in these adaptive roles and so comfortable there that they don't even know who they are beyond that role? Can it be, or can it feel like the entirety of your personality, and that you haven't quite discovered yet who you are outside of this adaptation?
Absolutely. And especially I think the adaptive child is especially tricky to move beyond. And when I say move beyond, I don't mean we get rid of it, but to be able to cultivate that observer self, to see that these were once adaptive behaviors that eventually become maladaptive. It's really tricky for women. Because if you think about that skill set of the adaptive child, pleasing and being intuitive and guessing what somebody would want and folding yourself into that pretzel and going along and those sorts of things, those skills are so championed in our society. Well, if you live in a patriarchal society, those skills are really championed in women. And so then we get, not only is it keeping us, in ways it keeps our sweet little pure child protected, then we also are getting praised for it. We're getting accolades. It's not just about safety now. It's also, those skills become skills that help us thrive. But the thriving is so much because we're in a patriarchal society. Like, we're thriving because we're a good girl. Ooh. So when you have the fact that it's keeping you safe, you've got survival on your side, and you're thriving and getting praised for it, it can be very hard to see it as, quote, bad, and it's not bad, it's just, it can become maladaptive to the point where, what you're saying, you lose yourself, or you feel like you're betraying someone if you have needs, because you're not supposed to have needs, because that's really inconvenient, because how are you going to please others if you have needs and then they don't get along? Yeah.
Right. Well, and if you live your entire life in relationship and in society where you're getting praised and positive feedback and rewarded for these pleasing behaviors. So, you as a child, I was very much like you, a parentified child, the oldest of six. So rather than being the only child, I was mommy number 2 to all the younger kids. So you get rewarded for being responsible and taking care of everyone and being selfless. You become very attuned to your parents because that attunement keeps you safe when you have a parent who is emotionally reactive or maybe a little bit immature. And then you get out in the world and you choose partners that mirror this because that feels safe. That's what you're used to. So you become a parent to your partner and you are the responsible one in the relationship. And then you go out into the world, and being responsible and taking care of other people is exactly what you're supposed to be doing when you're an amazing teacher. So every relationship, every place I find myself, my job, the world, my marriages, as a mother, I'm rewarded for this adaptive child behavior. And I don't even
Yes.
know who the fuck I am beyond it.
Mhm.
How do I figure out who I am, Catherine?
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you for sharing that background that I'm sure will resonate with many people in your audience. Also, don't let me forget to talk about how adaptive child looks in men in our society. But I will mention that there's a book that I recommend all the time for people who really learn to overly rely, in my opinion, on their adaptive child skill set. And it's called The Drama of the Gifted Child. Now, this is a translated book and
I have
title.
read this, yes.
Yes, it's a translated book and title. So the title's a little confusing in our language. By gifted, I know when I read it that I thought it meant academically gifted because, of course, academics are everything, right? Really what they mean by that, yeah, really what they mean by that is, by gifted is, it's more like gifted in perception, or you might say it, the drama of the overly responsible child, the drama of the perfected child, I think would be better translations. And it is that idea that you learn that if you can figure out what your parents need, then yes, you can stay in attunement, you can avoid conflict, you can get love and attention and praise and approval, because as a kid we think all those are the same thing. One of the things we learn in the adult chair is that love and approval are different planets. Watch out, this is going to blow your mind. Love and approval are different planets, and the weather system on planet approval cannot actually affect the climate on planet love. So think about your children. You love them. And even if they did something horrible, terrible, awful, they're in prison for murder, your planet approval is a hot mess because you do not approve of that. You are so distraught that they have done these things, but planet love hasn't changed. But as a kid, we don't understand that. We think that approval, that attention, that attunement, that lack of conflict means love. So we hustle to do all the approval-seeking things so that we feel loved and therefore safe, because they're not going to leave us if we're lovable. So The Drama of the Gifted Child, it's a pretty short book, but damn, it will sit you down and help you understand where that is. Yes, I also think that's a good thing. Okay, so you're asking me how you find yourself. But actually, before we talk about how you find yourself,
I know that's way too big.
It's big. I think that's
way
book,
too big a question. I'm sorry.
No, it is. We can nick away at it a little bit. First of all, I do think that book really helps because it helped me understand where that behavior came from, why I was doing it. It's also interesting because she's calling out parents and therapists. So I was reading it like threefold. I'm reading it as little Catherine. I'm reading it as Catherine the mother and Catherine the therapist, because they say a lot of people who are like the drama of the gifted child, that gifted child often ends up becoming therapist types or in clergy or something like that, where we want to have that approval by helping in that way, or teachers. And she challenges us to say, how are you exploiting your clients or your students to feel needed and get your needs met? And it's like, oh God. And are you doing this to your children? Are you asking them to be less of who they are so that you can feel needed and approved? It's like, ouch, Alice Miller, stop. I need a break.
Get out of my head.
Yeah, it's intense. It's intense. But so certainly that
is one way. As Brene would say, you don't know me.
Yeah. You don't know anything. So I think that book's a great start. Again, Michelle Chalfont's brilliant idea to bring mindfulness and meditation in, where really what mindfulness is just, in terms of these parts, it's really cultivating, as you've heard me say, that observer self, that part of us that can watch ourselves play our own games. Or when we start to have an observer self, we might do the same thing with the same friend that we've always done, but there's something in us that's like, this doesn't quite feel right. Like, am I being true to myself here? Or like, it just starts to ask these questions. And so what we want to do is start to realize that this observer self really, it's like the beginning of that adult chair, that wise, benevolent leader. Again, we're not getting rid of your adaptive child. She has served you really well. Really well. And the first thing we want to do when we start to address these parts is thank them. They've done so much good. They have kept us so safe and protected in really tough and awful situations growing up and in adolescence. And it's helped you thrive and be a great teacher and a great mother and a great partner. So we can't just say, like, you're a bad girl, adaptive child, quit that shit. We thank her. We listen to what she's trying to get us to do. And then the adult says, is there a way where I can still stay true to myself, protected, without having to hustle and fold myself into a pretzel?
Yeah.
Just that.
It's tricky. just that
tricky.
little thing.
Just that. Let me quickly, I know we're having badass women in the lifestyle girl talk, but I do want to say that adaptive child shows up in men as well. And I work with a lot of men. Right. That tends to be I tend to work honestly more with men, more men than women. This is where we get into the No More Mr. Nice Guy, which is a book that I recommend to almost every man that I've worked with. And that's where men learn that the way to protect their pure child is to be Mr. Nice Guy. And usually Mr. Nice Guy is not the opposite of Mr. Asshole. Like a lot of the women I've worked with, they're like, wait, I saw this book. Are you trying to tell my husband to stop being nice? And I'm like, yes, actually, because nice is not what we want. Kind, clear, direct, and firm, yes. Nice, not so much, because usually when we're being nice, we're sacrificing or betraying ourselves. And so men do this as well, and they learn passivity, they learn to go along to get along, they learn to be the knight in white in shining armor, that like Brene Brown talks about, and never have their own needs, and that doesn't last for long. Honestly, for me, when I see the No More Mr. Nice Guy that was an adaptive child, has his adaptive child as the leader, we are careening fast for a destructive midlife crisis usually. If they don't do the work.
Right. Interesting.
Because I think with women, it's like we can go along longer being using our adaptive child skills because we're championed for those as women in a patriarchal society. But when men are trained to be Mr. Nice Guys through their adaptive child skills, those skills are somewhat championed in a patriarchal society, but not all the way for men. So then there's this tension between that and often because men have been socialized to not be as tuned into what's going on, it's like they're passive, and then there's this explosion where they blow everything up. I see a lot of that. So,
right.
And also I'll say that most of the time men, if they're going to have a protector part that's louder, often theirs is more that rebellious, snarky teenager, because men are going to be more championed for being that strong. I've got a voice. I'll stick it to the man. Like they're going to get more championing for that than if a woman's doing that, because then she's just a loud bitch, right?
Right. Right.
Yeah. Not to say that some of us women don't have some really loud, snarky adolescents. I will raise my hand. I have the sharp tongue on that one. Wow. Don't get in a debate with me if my lid is flipped.
Well, as the adaptive child, I so admire the women who can stand up for themselves and just say, no, fuck you. I'm not going to take it anymore. I wish I could do that more.
Well, but honestly, what I end up doing though, when that happens, it might look attractive to you. But again, remember that cutting off the nose to spite the face. How many times I've shot myself in the foot, or my sharp tongue has really come back and cut me, or cut someone out of my life, or I've hurt someone that I love with those sharp words or whatever. And so really we don't want either one of those driving the train. Now, you can admire, I hope that you will, and I'll be absolutely fine with you admiring me in my adult chair when I'm kind and firm and have boundaries and say, I'm sorry, that's not going to work for me. We're going to have this. But if I'm saying fuck you, I'm probably hurting myself.
Yeah. Okay. So I won't,
you see the difference?
Yeah. I won't cultivate that too much. So I do want to get into how we can use this adult chair parts work most effectively in lifestyle situations. So, we encounter all kinds of hangups and setbacks, especially as women, I think, with insecurities around body image and losing the security of our relationship with our partner. And I imagine these inner parts, these protective parts, probably come up even more in lifestyle situations. There are so many ways to be triggered. So I don't know, this is a big question, but what are some of the ways you think that this can be most helpfully used in lifestyle situations?
Yes. Okay. So first of all, I want to say, let's not forget the pure child when we talk about lifestyle situations, because remember how I said, I didn't really know how to play. I didn't get that.
Yeah.
I figured out how to play when I got into lifestyle. Like,
Yes,
that's why they
me
call
too.
it that. That joy, that excitement, that fun, being fully in our bodies, like using the blood that rushes to all of our erotic zones helps us get in our bodies in ways that us, nerdy intellectuals didn't know how to do. So the pure child freaking loves the lifestyle in that way, because we get to play and we get to be responsibly irresponsible, and we get to, it also can be, you can feel a lot of pure fear because you may lose your partner, or not you lose your partner. You may see your partner doing something that this little kid doesn't understand. Remember the little kid that says, mine, this is my toy and I don't want to share it. And then you're like, I'm having so much fun. All these people want to play with me, but wait, that's my toy. Bring him back to me. Right? So this part, it's like they love it, but they're also like so confused because there are things that, quote, shouldn't be happening, right? There can be pure sadness, of being rejected in lifestyle. And so the pure child is going to feel a lot of feels. But honestly, for some of us, it's a breath of fresh air, because our protector parts had gotten so strong and rigid that one of the ways that they protected the pure child was to just keep her locked up in a room somewhere so she wouldn't get hurt, wrapped in bubble wrap. So we didn't play, we didn't feel all the feels. We were safe, we were secure, but we weren't getting to run around the house and be pure children. So there is a beauty in what the lifestyle and ethical non-monogamy can bring to the pure child. So because the pure child is now feeling all these feels and is not, in fact, in the attic wrapped in bubble wrap, the protectors are like, oh, fuck, our job just got so much harder, right? Because now they have this wild little child running around, getting hurt, having fun. Oh my gosh, what could happen? So now, in some of the ways that in our very safe modern adult society, we've been able to keep the pure child safe. And so then the protectors didn't need to be out and about all the time and everything felt really stable. Whew, the house just got loud. Kids running around. The adaptive child is rushing after, trying to clean up after her and trying to right. And then the adolescent is screaming and saying, fuck you, and throwing dishes and all this stuff, right? One time I had somebody say, I said, oh my gosh, after the work we did on those parts, we had the best play experience. We went to a party and it went great. And I was like, awesome. What'd you do? And he's like, it was so easy. Before I left, I did this journaling that you told me to do between my parts. And I visualized chaining up my adolescent in the basement. I chained him up, no food, no water. And I went out and had a blast and told him he was not invited to the party. And I was like, okay. And I was like, how are things going? He's like, still great. And I was like, when was the party? Yesterday. And I'm like, oh God, that teenager is going to come up the stairs so hungry and pissed. I was like, dude, we're not trying to get rid of them and we don't want to punish them. We need to manage them. Yes. But this is not a long-term solution. So yes, when you say there's so many things that can trigger us, yes, and that's why these protector parts get loud and about town more than maybe they have before.
So is there anything you can do maybe in, debriefing with your partner that will help you process or avoid those that hungry teenager coming up from the basement and throwing a tantrum. Is there something we can do to, to work through these things before they become a problem?
Oh, absolutely. And first of all, as you heard me mention when I worked with this couple, I really encourage. I mean, it sounds crazy. Talk to yourself. Talk to your parts. For a lot of people, journaling works well. For some people, talking works well. Michelle Chalfant, if the listeners go back and listen to some of her, especially her earlier episodes, she has this beautiful visualization that she shares that as she was learning this, it was when her sons were still young and they were in the back seat and she's driving them to school. And she said she would imagine, her boys would get out and then she would imagine little Michelle getting in the front seat, because back then little kids could sit in the front seat, and her little pigtails of the little lunchbox, and she'd sit in the front. And she's like, so from the way home from school, or from school to home, I would just chit chat with this part of me and I get to know her again. And this is a part that people think is kind of weird. That you would have to kind of reintroduce yourself to your parts. But if you think about it, these parts, for most of us, we didn't really learn to have a whole lot of trust for adults consistently. And again, we're talking about the middle or the lower brain, so we lack a specificity and we lack linear time when we're in that part of the brain. That's why a garden hose would make me jump just as much as a snake if I'm already triggered and activated. So really, those parts learn that all adults sound like the Charlie Brown teachers. Wah 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 wah. There's no differentiation that this adult could be trusted any more than our parent who was uncomfortable with our needs or our expressions of emotion. So part of it is like when I talked about like cultivating the trust with these parts. This becomes a daily practice. And this is way before you show up at PCAP or you show up at a hotel takeover, or you show up at a separate date, or you send your partner off for a separate date. Becomes a daily practice for a while. I listened when I was first starting to really dig into parts work. My first big explosion with jealousy led me to this and really got me through. I was listening to the adult chair at least every day. And some of the episodes over and over, but she has so many that I needed to hear that vernacular daily to remind me to think like that. Then I started doing some of the visualizations. She has a wonderful meditation about meeting your inner child that I used over and over and over. Still use it sometimes, years and years later. And then I started journaling with my parts. So my journal often looks like a play. What do you call that? Script.
Yeah. Screenplay or script. Yeah.
Screenplay. Yeah. Script or screenplay. So it'll have like, I'll say me, and that's adult me. And then, so I'll usually start with, all right, girls, what do you think about my boyfriend's reaction to blah, blah, blah? Or like, what do you think about the party? Or what do you think about what mom said about da, da, da? Because when you journal, sometimes we lose the umph of our journal because or at least I used to think I needed to journal like Laura Ingalls Wilder writing my memoirs. And so I'd write all the details of that fight I had with my mom, or what my boyfriend said, or what my kid did. And by the time I'd gotten through all the story, my hand hurt, I was done, I was bored. And I heard this great tip that therapeutic journaling, you're doing it right if you go back and read your journals 5 years later and you're like, what was I upset about? What happened in that fight with mom? It doesn't matter. We're using therapeutic journaling to get at what's happening at the moment with our emotions. Okay, so all right, girls, how do you feel about the fight with mom on Saturday? And then I use T for teen, and I use A for adaptive child, and I use C for my pure child. And I started dialogue. Now I'll never forget the first time I did this. I was sitting outside of my counselor's office after a session, and he had recommended this. And so I was like, all right, I'm going to try it. And I wrote, hey girls, what do you think about, I honestly don't even remember what I was upset about. What do you think about whatever? And my adaptive child, because she's a rule follower, she had all sorts of things to say. And then I did T for teen, and all I could think to write was eye roll. I was like, okay. I was like, oh, so it seems like you don't really want to talk right now. And then I wrote, pfft. I was like, are you thinking I won't listen? And then teen writes, you are such a motherfucking sucker and you will bend over and take it from anybody. So I'm not going to even bother telling you because you won't listen. And I was like, damn, girl, it sounded like you had some things you needed me to hear. So you start this dialogue and it may be slow going. And then when you're leading up to an event or a date or something like that, when you've already had this practice, it's a great way to organize because that's something I hear. People will be like, I feel like I'm crazy. We'll be getting ready for the party and I'm so excited and I'm so turned on and I can't wait. And I imagine my partner and I'm like, this is going to be so hot. And then we're in it and I'm like, I hate him and I hate her and I want to go home. And then I get home and I'm like, why did I leave? I wish I was there. What's wrong with me? And I'm like, because your butt's going in different seats, right? So journaling like this or visualizing like this can really help organize what feels like a circus in there sometimes.
Yeah. As you're talking about the snarky teenager, I was wondering, do you think that part is that internal critic that's always like, you're too fat, you need to get to the gym? Is that the part that's berating me in my head?
Certainly could be. Certainly could be. There again, there are nuances here. So when I said critical professor, that one has a very specific flavor about, my grammar policing or actually the first time I'd listened to Michelle Chalfont's podcast for probably 2 years and I had the opportunity to go to a weekend workshop with her and I was so excited, paid the money, got the hotel, I'm there, got my journal. And the first thing she talked about was auras. Now, I definitely have a bit of a hippie side and I've definitely got some woo-woo, but my critical professor has always told me to keep that shit under wraps. Like, don't lead with that, and she led with it. And so then, and I didn't know my critical professor quite yet, but she led with that. And I just remember kind of having in my head this wah, wah, wah. And I just sat there like this for the first half of the day and doing meditations. I couldn't get there. So like the second meditation, I was like, all right, there's a part in the room. What do you need me to hear? Here I am doing a parts workshop. What do you need me to hear? And it was like you could hear his padded, patched elbows be like, all right, here, let me tell you. Let me get my tweed jacket on and tell you that you have worked too hard as an academic to come here and learn about auras. And if you bring this shit to your clients, they are going to think you are a woo-woo crazy person and you're going to lose all credibility and you're going to lose your business and you're going to end up homeless. And I'm like, damn, dude, that's a lot. Okay. And I was like, so what I hear you say is you're worried that she's leading with things that aren't academically, stringent enough. So, absolutely, he says. Like, okay. Well, I was like, here's the deal. I've already paid the money. I'm here. How about if we do this? Why don't you go hang out outside? Let me absorb us all in. I'm going to take tons of notes. I'm going to get all the handouts. And when I get home, before I integrate any of this into my work or my clients, I want you to sit with me at my desk and I want you to help me say, this is Michelle Chalfont and this is Catherine. And I'll need you there for that because I agree. Like I have built my business on a certain type of rubric and you've been part of that. And he's like, all right, have fun. And I was like able to meditate every time. I got into all the exercises and I did that when I got home. And there's a lot from that workshop I've never brought into clients and a lot that I was able to because I got him to quiet and exit stage left. Right. So when you're asking about your critical, like the body image and stuff, it could be some snarky teen. It could be, though, there's definitely some adaptive piece, right? Because your adaptive child might tell you what you're supposed to look like. Right? Very tuned into what's supposed to be. So I would guess that for you, especially with body image stuff, that one might be its very own special seat at the table. Another great book I will put in the show notes is Life Without Ed. Are you familiar with that?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
About personifying your eating disorder as Ed,
yeah,
eating disorder, and talking to it. And so that's parts work as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've had some success with, kind of building compassion for myself and reparenting my inner child by I have a picture of myself with my little sister when I was 3 and she was just a a little baby. And I had that as the home screen on my phone for a while. So I would,
Mm.
pick up my phone and see little me, little toothless me holding my little sister. And I would talk to her and I'd call her sweetie,
Yeah.
because this is what I call my
Yes.
kids. Hi, sweetie.
Yes.
How are you
Hmm.
doing? You're doing a good job. I know you're trying to take care of your sister and you're trying to be a good kid, and it's okay. You don't have to be
Hmm.
scared. I got you.
Yes.
So trying
Yes.
to just visually see that little version of me and make the emotional associations I have with my own kids of like compassion and love and
Hmm.
understanding and being the loving parent. I had a little bit of success with that, just as
Yes.
another little tool to add to the toolbox.
Yes, and it's easy
Uh,
to let it go. We've got to keep bringing it in. We like, you know, it's
yeah.
easy to let it. It's just like, I mean, like with meditation. Wow, I'm feeling so calm. I don't think I need to meditate anymore. And it's like, oh my gosh, that's why I'm calm because
Mm-hmm.
I've been meditating. It's like, wow, I'm feeling good. I can change my
Yeah.
screensaver. Maybe not. Maybe we need those
Yeah.
reminders to keep the dialogue rolling with these parts. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, our hour is up, and it went so
Mm,
quickly because I just love talking to you.
same,
But
same.
we are going to have another couple opportunities to see each other and talk. So you mentioned the Being Better at Being Bad week. We are both going to be at the Hito Takeover hosted by Naughty Jim starting January 6th. I think there are actually still rooms available. So if you are a totally last minute person and you're wanting to jump on that, you could come to Hito with us and with Naughty Jim. But we are also launching a very exciting new project. So,
Yes.
yay! As part of Sapio Tour's new tour announcement, we are going to do a Women of the Lifestyle Wellness Weekend. So, Catherine and I are partnering to host an event for women only. So this could be women who are just considering the lifestyle and maybe want to talk through some of their fears and insecurities before they get into it. It could be women who have been in the lifestyle for decades and are still excited about the idea of sitting down with a group of women and sharing some of their wisdom, maybe having some of their questions answered. And we're going to do this April 25th to 28th in Martinsburg, West Virginia. So hopefully that's a location that's accessible for a lot of people. I looked at the map and thought, okay, where can we host this that's within about a 6-hour driving distance of the maximum number of people possible?
Yes.
And we're going to come together for this long weekend. I'm going to bring in a chef to do healthy meal prep for us. I'm going to lead some reflective writing workshops. Catherine is going to lead some group coaching sessions. She's also going to be our in-house yoga instructor. And so we are very, very excited to continue this conversation with more badass women of the lifestyle. So April 25th to 28th. If you want to know more about it, go to sapiotours.com and click on the Women's Retreat tab. And
Yes.
Catherine, I
And
want
make
to
sure
give
you
you a
bring your make sure
chance to plug. Oh, go
yes, I was
ahead.
going to say make sure you bring your journals when you come to if you get to come to that Women in the Lifestyle Wellness Weekend, because we will definitely be doing some writing, as Kate mentioned, and then we might as well check in, see if we can do a little screenplay writing with your parts. So we will have some journal prompts to help you with just what we were talking about today. And I'm so
Yeah.
excited. Thank you for asking me to do this. And you didn't sell this place nearly enough. This is a freaking gorgeous modern mansion on a river with a hot tub, with kayaks, with stand-up paddleboards right on a river. I mean, when you hear West Virginia, you are not going to believe these pictures. I promise. Yes.
Yeah, and
And
I
we do.
envisioned it like summer camp. We've got, 18 bunk beds. So we're all going to pack in there. We're going to bring our pajamas and slippers and, have a really fun bonding, connecting time. I think it's going to be a really rich time of connection and sharing and healing for so many people.
I love, let's come full circle that you said it's like summer camp. And remember, as an 18-year-old, I was teaching stress reduction workshops to campers at a summer camp.
There you go. You're right back there.
Love it, love it, love it. Yes. So one thing I'll mention, I am gonna we'll put the books that we've mentioned and the podcasts that we've mentioned in the show notes, as well as I'm gonna do a discounted version for my musical chairs webinar if you want to hear more about a deeper dive. It's about an hour, but a deeper dive into these chairs and some tips for how to manage them. We, as Kate mentioned, we're going to be at Hito. Miche, one of my other coaches, and I will be talking about triggers and why they happen, fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. We're going to be teaching couples yoga and individual yoga. We're going to give some regulation tools for individuals and couples when they are triggered. Our group is going to be at the Miami PCAP at the end of May, and also the San Antonio PCAP in October. So our group we're getting out and about this year. We also have some holiday specials. We have some self-learning courses, and if you buy those, you get a free webinar as our holiday gift to you. And we always encourage people to remember that there's you, and there's your partner or partners, and then there's also the entity between you, the relationship. And your relationship needs love and attention and maybe even some gifts too. So give your relationship and yourselves the gift of coaching or learning, whether it's books or courses of ours, coaching, continuing to listen to podcasts together and journaling about them. But don't forget your relationship this holiday season.
Thank you so much, Catherine, for being here with us and for saving my marriage.
Oh, it's a beautiful marriage to be part of saving. You all did the work, but I certainly loved holding some space for you.
I appreciate you.
And you.
Bye.
Bye.